We have oil surging, yes, easing somewhat today, but some expecting, like JP Morgan, seeing oil at $185 a barrel by the end of the year. How is the transport sector looking at this? How worried is it?
Well, good morning, Aslinda. It's always a pleasure. I think it's quite clear that the impact is really in terms of how it affects through, in the first instance, on the cost of fuel, which affects the entire transportation sector. And beyond that, of course, the systemic impact in terms of inflationary pressures, and therefore business costs. So in the first instance, I think already, even before this incident in Ukraine, we've seen a run-up in fuel prices, etc. And now this has accentuated that. I think the businesses are coping with them in a variety of manners, including diversification of sources, and also in the case of Singapore's land transport, there's been a significant effort to move towards electrification. Whilst electricity will still be affected by the cost of fuel, but it does lessen the cost impact and also lowers the carbon emission.
Of course, higher oil prices coming at a time when the aviation sector is only just beginning to recover. Singapore Airlines beginning to rehire. I'm just wondering, there's a boost coming from the government, 500 million Sing dollars, 60 million of which will go to manpower crunch. What's your sense of the manpower crunch within the transport sector? Where are you seeing that the most?
So it's very important. We have set the very clear goal that we want to restore the passenger volumes in Changi Airport to at least 50% of pre-COVID levels this year. And that is building on what we've already achieved by the end of last year, about 15%. And in going up in this more than threefold jump, we do need to increase the capacity and operational capability. And to your specific question on manpower, there's been about a significant attrition of the order of magnitude of about 1/3 that is because of the COVID pandemic's impact. So now they are in the process of recruiting, re-establishing those capacities. And this is both from the domestic market, from Singaporeans, but also from overseas. And this is where we are working with the industry and with the relevant authorities to help our aviation companies.
Minister, let's talk about travel. In Parliament, you talked about how Singapore is looking at opening up fully vaccinated travelers without quarantine. When might that happen? Could you give us a timeline for that?
So we have done, we're in the first phase, as you know, progressively opening VTL. So actually today, substantively, we have connections with all parts of the world for vaccinated travelers to come in and enter Singapore quarantine-free. The VTLs are really a mechanism to manage the volumes, as it were. So it's approved VTL flights. What will happen in the next phase is really moving towards vaccinated quarantine-free travel. In other words, the volume control will be relaxed and the source control in terms of vaccinated travelers.
But Minister, when can we expect fully vaccinated travel without quarantine in Singapore? We have the likes of Malaysia implementing it on the 1st of April. Might you do that sooner or later?
No, I think the short answer is sooner. We are evaluating the health situation, public health situation. That's a key assessment point, and also the protocols. So we expect to be able to move on this sooner, and certainly we need to do so to achieve our 50% goal. But one additional point I would make, it's one thing to say we're opening up in this manner, and many countries have announced this. How you ramp up your airport capacities to meet that demand rise is going to be key, because there's been significant attrition around the world.
Minister, what are the conversations you're having with Hong Kong? When can we expect freer travel between the two cities?
Hong Kong is a very important partner, and we've been following the developments there very closely. I think because of the public health assessment, our Ministry of Health, they were initially on what we call a unilateral opening category, meaning we allowed Hong Kongers to come into Singapore without quarantine, even though it was not reciprocal. But we have since moved Hong Kong into a different category from a health assessment point of view. But we have opened up a VTL with Hong Kong, so vaccinated travelers from Hong Kong can come to Singapore and enter Singapore quarantine-free.
But any suggestions from the Hong Kong government about when freer travel can take place between the two? And how important is it for Singapore to reconnect with Hong Kong that way?
Absolutely important that all the hubs in our region open up and reconnect. But of course, each of us has to do this very mindful of the domestic public health situation. And I think in the case of Hong Kong, they're quite focused on that as well. But I would say that this is critical. The connectivity within Asia, and in particular between the key aviation hubs, is an important prerequisite for the resumption of growth in aviation in our part of the world.
Minister, you talked about VTL earlier. I'm just wondering when you expect all the quotas to be dropped. Because we heard from the health minister saying that the peak of Omicron has passed. So why hang on to the quotas that you have right now?
The peak has passed, as our health minister has said, and it started to moderate. But we need to establish that the pattern is clear and the trend is certainly downward. And once that assessment has been made, then we can make this transition confidently. And as I said earlier, I expect to be able to move on this sooner rather than later. And when we make that transition, then it will no longer be about VTLs, but about just vaccinated travel.
Minister, given the optimism that you're expressing right now, when do you expect travel to get back to pre-COVID levels?
I think that is a more difficult question because it's a function of many other factors that are beyond our control. I'll give you one example. China is a major source of tourism flows, not just for Singapore, but for many other parts of the world. And China today remains closed to travel. And if you look at the forecast from IATA and so on, the expectation is that pre-COVID levels might be achieved by 2025. So I think what we really want to say is, let's build up the momentum now, get back to levels which are at least 50%. But I would imagine over the next, between 23, 24, 25, we should be able to see a stronger pickup beyond the current levels once key markets open up.
So, given what you have just said, realistically, when do you see a reopening of Terminals 2 and 4, and when do you see the construction of Terminal 5 taking place?
So Terminals 2 and 4 were temporarily closed when we had COVID, and in order to right-size the operations at the airport and manage the processes more tightly, taking heed of the public health requirements. We expect Terminal 2, which has also been going through some upgrading works and so on, to progressively open from this year. So that's going to be an important move. Terminal 4 will take a bit more time, but I imagine as well that it will respond once the demand picks up. Your question on T5 is an important one. We had announced earlier that we were taking a 2-year pause because of the pandemic. It has given us the opportunity to revisit the design, take into account the developments from the pandemic and what that may mean for airport operations. Also to incorporate elements that will further reinforce sustainability. So we are very firmly committed to the development of T5, but in terms of the exact timing, that is something that we will announce in due course.
Before we get to trade, Minister, your thoughts on what's happening in Russia?
Specifically,
the war on Ukraine. How do you see that playing out, especially in the transport space, in the travel space, and the impact that Singapore could feel?
So I think first we have taken, Singapore's position has been very clear. We are not taking sides, but we are taking a stand on principles because this is about sovereignty, it's about political independence and territorial integrity of countries. And as a small city-state, we think it's important that the international norms that govern this and also, the UN Charter, I think these are important principles that need to be observed in order for the conduct of the affairs of states to continue smoothly. Impact I think the most immediate impact is obviously on fuel prices, which is already affected, and we can see the impact. Secondly, I think that it has disrupted supply chains somewhat in certain flows, and that we are seeing flow through in food, and also in the impact on prices on food items and some other related items. But perhaps the most significant thing is the lingering uncertainty about where this will go. I think that is the thing that will need to be resolved if businesses are to be able to continue making investments with confidence, and for individuals to also make plans, whether it's for personal or business travel.
Minister, I'd like to touch on trade because you oversee trade relations for Singapore. Has Singapore been approached by the US to join the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework?
Well, I think we are in discussions with the US and with many other partners in this part of the world on different types of partnerships. This is, for example, we have, as you know, digital economy partnerships with Australia, with New Zealand, Chile, and so on. And this is an area that we are also keen to discuss with the US and with other partners, because we need to create that framework that will facilitate digital trade and digital economic connectivity in this part of the world, but also with the world as a whole. And this is an area that we're working on. And within that construct, we are engaged with the US on different kinds of modalities, bilateral, plurilateral, multilateral, and that's not just with the US, but also with other like-minded partners.
Minister, before we let you go, I'm just wondering, is there anything within the framework that seeks to politicize and perhaps at the expense of China? Is there a sense of that within the framework?
Our approach to these kinds of trade relations and trade pacts has always been that we must maintain an open architecture. In other words, we should set the rules clearly. There should be high ambition. They should be seeking to stretch the boundaries and create new opportunities for businesses and people. And those who want to come into those agreements subsequently must be able to meet those standards and those high ambition requirements. That is the basic premise on which we engage in these kinds of trade negotiations.